So, hello everyone. Let's just welcome to the panel session on facilitating greater data reuse. We will just wait a few minutes to give people a chance to join. Okay, so the joining seems to have slowed down a bit, so we will start. Welcome to this panel session on facilitating greater data reuse, lessons and examples from practice. And hopefully we will keep this discussion fair and squarely based around practice so that we can really have our feet on the ground and learn from our experience. I'm Juan Vicareggi from UKRI in the UK. I'm chairing this panel and I'm really pleased to have 4 excellent panelists, and I will just name them for you now, but let them introduce themselves shortly. So firstly, Amy Pienta, who's a sociologist, a research scientist from the ICPSR, which is the Consortium for Political and Social Research, and also has a position at the University of Michigan. James Hetherington, Director of the UCL Centre for Advanced Research Computing at University College in London, who recently was the Chief Data Scientist at our Joint Biosecurity Centre in the UK in the Department of Health and Social Care. Mala Virapan, I hope that's not too bad a pronunciation, a Senior Data Scientist at the World Bank, and Vundli Ramokolo, epidemiologist with the South African Medical Research Council. So what we do in this is in 2 parts, 3 comments, which we're together with a little bit of discussion between the panel will take probably about half of the session. And then in the second half of the session, we will address questions or comments submitted from the audience. So with that, I would like to point you to the panel on the right-hand side of your screen with the Q&A tab. If you go into the Q&A tab, you will be able to ask questions or make comments that we will see. You will also be able to vote on comments or questions made by other people, and that will push those questions to the top of the list. And obviously the questions at the top of the list will be the ones we most easily see, and we will try to address those in the second half of the sessions. So with no more ado, I will hand over to Amy to introduce herself and to tell us something about her experiences with enabling data reuse. Amy.
Thank you, Juan. I am Amy Pienta, as advertised. I am a research scientist at ICPSR, which is a domain repository. And I there direct business and collection development and also lead several topical archives where we are always thinking about data reuse and how to combine data and how to allow users to have that kind of functionality. And so I'll just spend a couple minutes talking about how we have accomplished that at ICPSR, especially with focus on the combining of data, because we really have invested heavily in data curation and metadata and tools so that users can find data to combine with one another, at least from all housed within ICPSR. And so with that, what I wanted to start with was a little bit about why a domain repository is unique from other repositories that you might think about when you think of this perspective. The main difference or the main benefit that ICPSR brings to this kind of question is that we have a very heavy data curation process. We curate data sets that come to us from our domain. Professional trained curators do that, and that really allows for better metadata and better findability and reuse, not just at the level of the study, that high level, but also deep down into the level of the variables and the data sets that we make available. So data quality is higher. We have standardized DDI-based metadata, again, to display to the users and to build tools that can parse that information. And also these curators and the staff at ICPSR iterate with the people who give us data so that we are sure that we are able to understand data at a pretty deep level, hoping that then down the road, users can do the same thing. The second point being here that we've also invested heavily in search and discovery tools so that users can discover this data to use and combine. And so what we are able to do is allow users to explore the data without ever downloading them and taking them, and allowing for comparisons of methodology and content. And I'll just forgive that I'm looking to the side. It's where my presentation is. I'm not seeing it head on in front of me, and I don't want to change my setup. So with that, we have a catalog that's searchable and discoverable. You can discover studies, but you can discover variables as well. And the other thing that users can do is that they can compare variables. And this is where it gets valuable for thinking about how data sets can be combined. And so here I've searched in our catalog. This is a search for energy drinks. I work for the Drug Abuse Archive. Energy drinks are one of the drugs that we think about in our collection. And you can see that there are 392 variables to potentially look at across the collection. I've selected 3 of them for this example. And so then what becomes possible here is a comparison, the top panel showing the variable name, and then each of the studies that these data come from. In this instance, they're coming from very different data sets. So an athletic involvement study, a study from Oregon, and Monitoring the Future, which is a very large, long-standing panel in the US, or repeat cross-sectional study in the US. Moving down, though, you're also getting information served back to the user about the variable label. So even if we don't have question text, which we do in the examples that I've chosen, you get a sense of what these variables are about as a user, so that you can begin to make an understanding if these are studies or data sets that you might want to take a closer look at. So you can see the first one's labeled past 30 days, but we don't see that reoccurring in either of the other labels. So drilling down, in this instance, we also are making available the exact question text as worded in the survey. And there you can see much more about different characteristics of the questions that were asked. And so the first one is specifically narrowing in on 30-day use of drinks like Red Bull. There's other drinks, though, that are mentioned in the other studies. And so the user might begin to think, are these things that I can combine or not combine? Is the 30-day period of interest to me, or am I interested in what they did last week? All those things are beginning to surface as being part of the question. Below that, flowing below that then, are the actual responses and the frequencies. And so you can see here there's 8 categories in the first one, and 5 and 7 in the last. You get the frequency distribution, so you can begin to look at if these are somewhat comparable in terms of distribution as well. Going further down, you get time period if you want to look at things over time, and also the universe. You can see the first one's from undergraduate men and women, the second one's from children in grades 1 through 5, and so on and so forth. So you can begin to see the differences. All of these things have different research outputs. I think I have about 1 more minute, Juan. Is that okay? Okay. And because we're providing this kind of metadata, we see a lot of reuse and combining in the research outputs that we capture in our bibliography related to the data. So we see publications where users have combined waves or cross sections. We see publications where people are able to make and compare national estimates, either across studies or time periods. We see a lot of papers that have meta-analysis kinds of techniques in use, and also combinations where people are combining contextual data with microdata, all within and across our collection. And just as a final word, we try to capture a lot of what people are doing in terms of algorithms and matching of data sets, because we know downstream that's what happens with the user. They're all writing a lot of code to combine these data sets for those publications, and we have a place for people to put both code and data sets that they've combined to try and aggregate information and knowledge about how this is getting done. So that's my opening comments, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. And maybe we'll just address one thing that's come up in the chat, which is, could you share the link for the to do those searches like you showed? Is that a publicly accessible repository? Yeah. So maybe at some time you could put that in the chat, or we can send it after. So yes, I wonder if there were any comments or reactions to that from other panelists before we move on. The thing that struck me there was really that this level of detail that you're doing across data sets is only possible because of the domain specificity of the repository, and equally the level of curation that you're able to do with the data is probably, again, a question of having the expertise within the team, which would probably not be possible in a multidisciplinary, in a non-specific repository. So that's clearly one difference in this kind of work. Any other thoughts?
I can come in if.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So I just wanted to point out that PSR is a huge inspiration for us when it comes to data curation. It's not, we often feel that everything that Amy talked about in her presentation is not something that people pay attention to. And to make data really reusable, you have to put in that much effort into data curation, so the data can be actually used in the best possible manner. So I just wanted to kind of just give a thumbs up on all the work that they do, and also publishing the best practices, which we at the World Bank also often kind of rely on for our own purposes. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's move on. James, you're next.
Hi, just checking I'm coming through loud and clear.
Your camera is off, or at least I don't see you.
It looks as on here, just resetting it. Do you see me now?
Do the other panelists
nod from? Yeah, I can see a nod from others. Yes,
okay.
Good.
We're seeing you. Is the sound quality okay? Sound quality is okay. It was not for me, but that's okay.
Okay.
All right, go ahead, please.
Yeah, good. Okay, so yeah, about a year ago, I was minding my own business as the Director of Digital Research Infrastructure at UK, thinking about the tools and systems we use for doing scalable research with data and computers, and picked up a phone call from someone, a chap who was Tom Smith, who runs the UK Office for National Statistics Data Science Campus, saying, do you want to come and get involved with something called the Joint Biosecurity Centre, which was an idea that had just been thought of to enable us to use data science, modeling, computing to get a better grip on the crisis of how to handle the coronavirus pandemic in the UK, which, as we were in late April 2020, was something. And I've spent most of the last year as Chief Data Science Advisor to that Joint Biosecurity Centre. It's been a real chance and challenge to apply some of the ideas and thoughts and principles we've been developing in the community of research technology professionals on how we bring these capabilities together in the most important challenge of how we use do data informed policy in my lifetime. Extremely scary and not always gone as smoothly as we might have liked. And I hope I've got a few thoughts to share on some of the lessons learned from trying to do the kind of things that in the research communities and academia we've been we've been struggling with in practice. I'm going to just run through a few of my my thoughts in that from the story, and look forward to having a discussion about the relevant. So one of the things in particular that's been important within my background, and I spent a lot of time being an advocate, is the role of research technology professionals, the roles of the research software engineers, data stewards, data scientists who are part of the research community. And you know, a really critical thing that I've seen over the last year is we have had near total deployment of all of the available research technology professional skills into the COVID challenge over the last year, and we knew there weren't enough, but we've really felt it, and that's something I'll keep coming back to. Another key area of interest that I have is in trusted research environments and data safe havens. The environments enable us to do productive research with sensitive data at scale. What I've found over the last year, when it comes to reusing those things in a crisis context and in a policy context, is that our processes really are really challenging when it comes to rapid scale up of complex multi. We have well-engineered trusted research environments now, with different data sets in different places, and we haven't. We're a long way from solving the problems of how we do distributed learning, how we do scalable learning, and I think that matters from a resilience point of view, because if we have to centralize all the data in one place, what a cybersecurity risk, what a privacy risk. So how do we maintain a distributed architecture while having the benefits of trusted research environments? Secondly, our processes for bringing people into this DREs doesn't address the rapidity of scale that we need when we want to apply data in a crisis, and I think we need to look at the challenge that's brought us. Another key issue there is so much of the use of the reuse of data is about the reuse of the code that goes with that data. Separating data reuse from software reuse is a miss on this, and structures for trusted research environments and data safe havens don't interact well with the open and scalable tools around GitHub, etc., that we have for code reuse. And you know, open is the only thing that scales when you need to move quickly, and yet we have a duty to maintain a very secure and a very closed approach when it comes to sensitive and confidential data, and we've let those two things develop separately. And we need to think carefully about how we bring the code reuse and the data reuse back together to enable that. Reuse outside the intended purpose for data, particularly model-mediated data. A lot of the data we're working with has value when mediated through mathematical and statistical models, and that model-mediated data, you share data along with the model, which I think is the right. But you use that model outside the context that it was created for, there are real reinterpretation risks. I think it's still the right thing to do to let that happen, because open is the only thing that scales, but we ran into some really tricky ones around that reuse of model-mediated data outside its intended purpose that got me involved in having to speak before a parliamentary select committee a few months ago. So that's one that I think I'll be looking forward to learning from. So I would say, that reuse is collaboration. Reuse generates collaboration, and some of those collaborations are implicit. One of the things that was most challenged for us is collaboration across the Python Excel boundary, or the R Excel boundary, if we talk about that as different communities. I found that with the right use of notebook technologies and literate programming technologies, we can mitigate some of that risk if we've got the right training. And the training that allows people to go, well, I don't understand all of that Python code in that notebook, but I can fiddle with those bits and repurpose it. And that's more scalable than building lots of dashboards. I find that I found, but that does not create a big drag for people who still have that. It looks like code. I don't want to go near it thing. And I think there's a training load we have to do around that. And the other thing, the experience I've had in this is it's really hard to do the necessary training when there's a crisis going on. I'm nearly finished. I know
You're overrunning.
I know okay. But yes, I think there's secondment issues are a problem. There's how do we do sort of reservist structure? And the last thing I want to talk about is audit trails and data quality issues. So I wanted to be able to say before we put a graph in front of the minister, I know every computer through which that data passes from the hospital bed to the graph we put in front of you for policy. We did not succeed at that. And that data audit piece is really pressing and something that I would like to do more on. I will.
Thanks a lot, James. A lot of really interesting things there that I'm sure we'll come back to later. Okay, so let's move on. Mala, you're next.
Sorry, I was just trying to share my screen. Just give me 1 minute, if you don't mind, please. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm already loving the discussion. What I wanted to sort of start off with is that, well, let me introduce myself first. I'm Mallarvi Veerappan from the World Bank, and I'm a senior data scientist, but also the past year, I've been the manager for the World Development Report 2021, which is a flagship report from the World Bank, and its topic is data for better lives. Basically, the report talks about what the role of data is in development. And here, what you see here is a conceptual framework, and I'm not going to kind of go into the detail, but this slide, can you see the slides moving? Just want to be sure.
Still on the first slide?
I guess not. Okay, let me move.
No,
yeah, what you see here is the conceptual framework, which talks about how data travels in 3 pathways across individuals, civil society, academia, government, and the private sector. But it kind of illustrates the positive and the negative development outcomes, some of the issues that James talked about, the balance of useful and harmful effects of data. But what I really want to touch upon is that the report really talks about the central theme around how we unlock potential by reusing data, especially where you create more collaboration across different stakeholders who are working on data. We talk about a lot of the potential that this can open up, but despite all of these innovative uses, we feel that the data is still largely underutilized, leaving much of the economic and social value of data untapped. So what I want to talk about today is, in a way, if I can sort of inspire how this reuse of data directly impacts people's lives, despite the different challenges that we have, and maybe that is something we can get into at the discussions later today. But I want to see if I can use a few of the illustrations or the examples that we use in the report to show how combining and repurposing data can really solve some of the development challenges. So the first example here is, one of the SDGs that I think the goal 3.6 is about reducing road mortality by half, which could save about 675,000 lives. Yet the countrywide investments in regulation, enforcement, education, and infrastructure needed to attain this ambitious target are often out of reach. Official data on road traffic crashes capture only about 56% of fatalities in low and middle income countries. And crash reports exist. But one of the biggest problems is some of this data is still buried in piles of paper or collected by private operators instead of it being converted into useful data, disseminated to the people who need the information to make policy decisions. So in the case of Kenya, official figures are underreported on the number of fatalities. But with the rapid expansion of mobile phones and social media, this provided an opportunity to leverage commuter reports on traffic conditions as a potential source of data on the road traffic crashes. So using big data mining combined with the digitization of official paper records, it has demonstrated how disparate data can be leveraged to inform urban spatial analysis, planning, and management. Researchers worked in close collaboration with the National Police Service to digitize more than 10,000 situation reports spanning from 2013 to 2020 from 14 police stations in Nairobi to create the first digital and geolocated administrative data set of individual crashes in the city. And then they combine the administrative data with data crowdsourced using a software application for mobile devices and SMS traffic platform. It's called MA3 Route, which has more than 1.1 million subscribers in Kenya. This is to say that they analyzed about 870,000 transport-related tweets to identify and geolocate about 35,000 plus crash reports, and by using and developing natural language processing and geosparsing algorithms. And what they did to verify the accuracy of the crowdsourced reports and the efficacy of the algorithms, the team dispatched a motorcycle delivery company to the site of the reported crash minutes after each new crash report was received for a subset of reports. And in 92% of cases, a crash was verified to have occurred in the stated location or nearby. So by combining these sources of data, researchers were able to identify the 5% of roads where 50% of the road traffic deaths occurred in the city. And you can kind of see that in the map, with the sort of the orange and the green. And you can see the differences in terms of how much data gap in traffic crash reports were able to be filled with all of this combining and repurposing of data. Again, I think more work can be done here, where more insights can be gained by integrating existing data and collecting further information, such as Uber and Waze data on average speeds, on road segments, or on road obstacles. I'll kind of stop here. This is just to sort of overall say that developing spatially integrated data sets that leverage administrative, social media, private, and more traditional sources can help to fill data gaps and actually have direct benefits on people's lives. Yuan, please stop me if I'm going over minutes. I have a bunch of examples, but I can stop midway.
You've used 5 minutes, but you can take a minute or two more if you like.
I could just maybe do one more example and stop and come back to the others if there's more interest to listen to this. So this is another example where in Croatia, traditional household survey data was previously used to determine deprivation. So these maps here were used to allocate EU funding based on regional GDP. This means that resources weren't reaching poor municipalities in non-poor regions. But by combining the household data with the population census and administrative data revealed large differences in living standards even within regions, previously unseen with just the household survey data. So now, armed with a more detailed poverty map, Croatia has responded with proposals for new regional divisions that concentrate EU funds in the poorest areas. I'll stop here, but if the main point that I wanted to make is that there is this tremendous sort of value in combining and repurposing data. And just sort of to follow up on James' points, he brought about a number of issues in how to effectively repurposing, ranging from technology issues to also data literacy issues. Just people even knowing how to use and combine these data, and also more research and methodological research and how you combine these different types of data sets. And especially in the context of COVID, we've seen how mobile data records and GPS data have also been used. And I have some examples that I can show later if anybody's interested. But again, there are several issues that still need to be sorted out in terms of how do you provide a more, how do you also prevent harmful misuse of the data. And I think the COVID, in the case of COVID and the use of mobile records have illustrated that tricky balance that you face between responsible use of data and collection and access to more data that you need. And also another point that I just want to make here in the reuse of data is, again, getting data in the hands of the right people who can actually make sense of that so that you can actually make important policy decisions or empower individuals from the information that you gather from the data. That is enabling more data access even between governments and academics and the research community, or likewise the data access from private intent data to governments. I'll just stop there, and again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mala. Then there are some questions about those same topics, so I'm sure we'll come back to them later, the challenges of repurposing and the tensions between privacy and openness. So I'm sure we'll come back to those. Thank you very much, Mala. Let's move on now to Vundli. Would you like to make an opening remark?
Yes, I'm just looking for my slide. Oh dear, I can't see my slides now. I can just speak to them because I can't see the
No, we don't see your slides. Oh, no, we don't see your slides now.
Can you? Yeah. Let me just switch on my video because I might need to switch that on.
Okay. You're also a little quiet, I think, from my end.
Can
Hello.
you hear me now?
Yeah, I think we can hear you. Can others hear fine? Yeah, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, let me see if I can share my slides now. No. Okay, I'll just speak to them.
Okay.
So a good day. I'll briefly speak about the challenges and opportunities of linking data to improve the usage of public health data coming from an upper middle income country setting. I'm also speaking as a public health researcher. So I'm from the South African Medical Research Council, as previously mentioned. The MRC is not only a research institution, we also fund research. In terms of the data governance structure at the MRC, it's governed by several laws, policies, and initiatives. I've got a list of policies that I've got on the slides, which govern our work. We also have an institutional data repository, which some of our researchers have started to use. In terms of study examples, I'm involved in several research studies that are linking primary research data with routinely collected public health data. These include a pregnancy prospective cohort study that's linking data from routine public health research settings with our study data. These sources include clinics, hospitals, labs, and death registers. I'm also involved in a national survey that's linking research data with public health administrative census data. The third study I'm involved in is focused on COVID-19, where we're linking routine public health data from clinics, hospitals, labs, death registers, and so on. In terms of the challenges, linking primary study data with routinely collected data presents several challenges and opportunities. These challenges include, firstly, the complexity of engaging with an increasing number of ethics bodies when one uses multiple source data. These ethics bodies may have different policies and turnaround times, which may sometimes impede the progress of the study. Secondly, acquiring institutional permissions for the multiple source data may be a cumbersome process. Thirdly, linking data sources requires investment in infrastructure for the data and in training of skilled personnel that will manage these data sets. Fourthly, with respect to data sharing, the different stakeholders and data providers involved in the study need to agree on how and for how long data need to be shared. This stakeholder engagement process may be lengthy and very complex at times. Furthermore, public health data can be qualitative, quantitative, audio, or visual in nature. Greater consensus is needed on how different types of data should be curated, protected, and shared. Lastly, most public health researchers and ethics bodies focus on minimizing access to data as a way of reducing potential harm for the participants. More work needs to be done to shift the culture from a default closed data perspective to one that embraces open data access as a default. Furthermore, more community engagement needs to be undertaken so that communities are more aware of the potential harms and benefits of sharing data. In terms of opportunities, there's a great need for training on data governance, particularly in the medical sciences. Given that research funders are increasingly requiring funding recipients to share their data, more investment is required on training researchers and data managers on how to incorporate data governance and open data sharing throughout the research cycle. Secondly, many public health databases are underutilized. Therefore, linking different data sources may facilitate greater usage of existing data to address new research questions. It may also be a more cost-effective approach to measuring long-term or rare health outcomes. Thirdly, the use of routine data sources may also lead to an improvement in the quality of data over time and in the strengthening of capacity development of personnel in the public health system. And lastly, data linkage involves several stakeholders, including research institutions, government departments, communities, and so on. The close collaboration of these stakeholders may improve service delivery, foster more patient or community-centered research, and lead to greater usage of research data by policymakers. Those are my initial thoughts and opinions. Thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bundy. Yeah, interesting points there, especially around the collaboration of stakeholders that you need in these very many different types of actors involved, all need to collaborate to get the right solution. And the issues around privacy versus openness coming up yet again. Any other comments? Any comments from the panel, either to Wundli's points or maybe observations across introductions? No? Well, let's move on then. We have 20 minutes, a little bit over 20 minutes left, and lots of very good questions in the Q&A section. Some of those have come to the top. There's obviously a time bias here because I think the first two questions were put in during Amy's talk, so they've had more time for voters to push them to the top. But I think it's worth looking at the shuffling in front of my eyes, making it difficult to track what I'm doing. Okay, so I think there was a question that was until recently at the top, which was around curators and whether the benefits of having specialists versus generalists. And in particular, the question, should bioinformaticians be biologists with some education in computer science or computer scientists with a favor of a biology education? So there's a very specific example. Any thoughts from the panel on that question? Yeah, Bundy, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I've actually had the same question over the years because, for instance, I received training in epidemiology, but it's becoming more apparent that you also need some, computer science training to deal with big data, for instance. And so I think there's greater scope for a more interdisciplinary approach to data, where you learn the basics so that you're able to manage both the small data sets where you're collecting your own primary research, but also galvanizing existing large data sets to address, for instance, like I said in my intro, where you're trying to look at more long-term outcomes or a very rare disease that requires large data sets.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, James?
I mean, I really think this is why team-based research is so powerful. It has to be both. And one of the things we're really trying to do in my new center in UCL is create the space inside the academy for those research technology professionals whose job is to be, I like to talk about myself as I'm a middle author scientist. I'm a proud middle author scientist. That's my job. And how do we create the home in the academy for those roles? Because we can only make this work through that T-shaped approach. I don't know if people are familiar with the T-shaped scientist idea of I'm great at collaborating across all the people's expertise horizontally, and I know my bit well, and we tie lots of T-shapes. And that's how we make that work. So we need the people who are domain specialists with some computery and data bits, and we need the people who are the computer and data people with expertise in, with good humility, learning their way into other people's research domains. And that's tricky. It's a lifetime of professional practice, but it's part of what makes it fun.
Thank you. I'm also you're reminded of your point about we just need as many people as we can get. So that would be another reason for taking both career paths. Any other comments on this question? Yeah, Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking, I made a big point, obviously, about the fact that we have, professional trained curators in large numbers. I saw there was another question about numbers, right? Like, we have almost 50 of them at ICPSR. So we're handling and processing a lot of data. But this question of, what kind of skill set is really needed, I think that we end up doing well with quantitative data sets, even when they are pretty far from our central domain in the social sciences. We certainly have our curators applying their skills and talents with quantitative survey data sets to data sets coming from clinical science, medical research, biomarker data, like all of those things. And so some of the mechanics are learned, and certainly there is still this like last little tip of the iceberg that, they don't have the domain expertise to fully understand perhaps all of the variables in detail of what they're looking at, but they know the mechanics of it and what to expose to the user, and what looks complete and what doesn't look complete. So maybe an 80 to 90% there, even if the domain is off.
Thank you. Vundli, and were you waiting as well, Mala, to say something? Okay, well, maybe we'll take Mala first and then back to Vundli.
I love that T-shaped example. I'm going to steal it, James, but but I agree, and I agree with what everyone's saying. I think one of the other problems we've seen is that just the recognition that whatever we call this group of people, generalist specialists by the institution, right? That these tasks are important. I think they do a variety of tasks. Sometimes what we call the last mile problem. Getting a data set out there published for it to be accessible to everybody else. Oftentimes data is collected without the intent of it being sharing, and then you kind of try and figure out, do you have, can it be shared? Do you have access to it? How do we, remove some of the variables? So absolutely, but I think the important thing is we need to convince our institutional senior management to be able to create this network of people, that this needs to be recognized as a professional stream. We're so much so even in the report advocating for, for this knowledge of data, a curriculum to be in public policy. If you're doing public policy, you have a course on just fundamentals, right? In technology, you have a fundamental of this. I think the next generation has to be sort of educated, like how technology is becoming, everybody needs to know how to use some of the basic things when it comes to technology. It's the same thing about data. You need to understand certain basic elements about data. Like you cannot publish data on PDFs, right? So, I just want to stop with that. Like, leadership in data, getting our institution to create this as a professional stream.
Thank you. So finally back to Vundli, and then we'll move on to another question.
Thank you, Juan. I'm just interested, Amy, you said you're a social scientist. How is your institution handling the qualitative data? It seems that doing very well in terms of quantitative data, but what about other forms of data? How's that going?
Yeah, we do have a good portion of our curators who've handled a lot of qualitative data, even just from the experience with survey data, where there's generally an open-ended question or two that ends up with a rich text block within the data file. So from there, we've developed pretty good, robust, de-identification techniques. And then, of course, in our archive, we have the ability to manage the data as restricted data sets and provide access to especially qualitative data sets that have some of that context remaining in secure ways using a virtual data enclave. But that's a really good question, Vinley. I think that's right. And from data type to data type, right, we end up having a very different expertise base to draw upon. Video gets harder. Lots of the biomedical data types like EEGs and brain images, we do some things with those things, but not as much as we should. And there we begin to rely more on the data contributor who's putting data into the archive to have done some of that quality checking and cleanup work. And then our role is much smaller. So good point.
Thank you, James. I think I'll move on, if you don't mind, to the next question, because otherwise we won't get through very many at all. We're not going to get through them all anyway. So I think the next subject is this one about data repurposing and the risks around data use and misuse. There is a question specifically about how to mitigate the risks of data and misused outside its original concept purpose. So this is about repurposing. Obviously, with the expertise on the panel, we must go into issues around privacy of personal data versus openness. All four of you have touched on that subject. So how do we do that? How do we balance the need for openness and the risk of misuse of data? Who would like to go first?
I can take a shot at it, Juan.
Please go ahead.
So this is sort of an area which, where I think the policy landscape is still very uncertain in terms of how, because the breadth of issues is just so large. So for instance, in the report, in the WDR 2021 report, what we advocate for is that, you need to protect misuse, at kind of any cost, in the sense that there can't be excuses that it's for, sort of, national security, and then you're compromising individuals' privacy, right? It's easy thing to say, but it is hard. But at the same time, our recommendation has been that you need to have stringent data protection laws, right? And very fundamentally, I think countries are now drafting data protection laws to sort of at least have some regulatory environment where you can control the misuse of data. That and more sort of in the law and regulatory environment that you create. But then from there, you create the laws, but then you also have to implement them, right? You need to have an institutional capacity to be able to comply or even hold others compliant to the laws that you have in place. And then at a very technical level, you do have the de-anonymization work that techniques that a lot of you probably are also working on, to see how do you basically protect, again, remove variables, and how do you protect data at a more technical level? Because now with so much data and so many advanced algorithms, there's also the debate about, okay, you can never really protect, you can always de-anonymize the data that's being put out there. So I think that this needs to be kind of worked at different levels. I think some of the things that we are advocating for, again, when you look at big picture in terms of setting out these data protection regimes, that clearly states how data needs to be handled, and then when you kind of step down from there, again, I want to tie this back to data curation, at least at an institutional level, is that there has to be a team that's advising, let's say ministries or in a government or in other institutions, that, at the beginning of the data, what we call life cycle, you understand how you're gathering data. These are decisions that you take at the beginning of a data collection exercise, not at the very end. You don't collect all the information and you draw certain parameters, and then later on you decide, you're kind of at this decision point of how do I use it, and whether it can be made available or not. So I just want to stop there and just hear
Thank
others.
you. Other thoughts from anyone else? Yeah, James?
So one point is, we've got quite good at building secure environments to allow us to just about get to grips with the data, with the original personally identifiable sensitive data, and do some work. The problem is we stop there. What we need to do is keep investing in the productivity of those environments after we've got it to the point where it's secure. I talked about the need for the ability to federate. I've talked about the need for efficient code mobility. We need sufficient compute resource inside those environments to allow us to be productive. So those are things that my worry is that we get to a just about working trusted research environment and we stop, and that's really leaving a lot of value and capability missing. Secondly, I think we make a mistake where when we release data, we audit it by auditing the generated, publishable, pseudonymized, or whatever data set. We need to audit the algorithm that was used to generate that. Mm-hmm. And that means that the people doing the data, whatever your data release through is, need to be able to scrutinize the code. And frankly, I need to see the script that you used to generate that anonymized data set before. I'm not just eyeballing the anonymized data. The last thing I just wanted to do is a shout out for a technology that I think has been really cool in this space this year, which is Ben Goldacre's work on the Open Safely project. If you've not come across that, do have a Google. It's a very clever use of synthetic data to enable more productive work with personal data that I think is worth people having a look at. I wasn't anything to do with it, but I think it's great.
Thank you, James. Wunderli, you put your hand up a minute ago.
Yes, I think I'll just re-emphasize the importance of greater training, because I know in my setting, in low middle income country settings, the literacy levels may not be up to scratch, and therefore some of the data misuse may be unintended, because people simply don't know about the dangers of, for instance, combining different data sets. What are the potential risks? So I think in some settings, we need to strengthen the training of researchers and data curators so that we minimize or mitigate some of the risks.
Thank you. I wonder if any of the panel want to follow up on James's point about being able to track the provenance of data through the software that was used to generate it, etc. This is clearly a very big challenge. Any thoughts? I
guess I had a question for James about that. You said, we need that, but who needs that? The data provider to ensure that that it's been maintained, the data users, so they can understand the decisions that were made. Who is the we there that you were talking about? That's interesting to me.
So I'm not doing it wrong. So for me, my ability to assess whether or not I'm accidentally about to draw an unsound conclusion depends critically on that pathway. I've got a little icon that says that my internet's not very good, so if I can't be heard very well, I apologize. So one example of this is we had some data that came from this wasn't in the COVID context, but in another context, where the data we had has sort of scrubbed some of the details from the experimental machines, right? Metadata that was generated in the laboratory context, which somebody who knows the particular experimental setup, right? It wasn't a big red flag, but it was a thing where somebody who knows the particular experimental setup can go, that's a bit smelly, isn't it? And we out all of that when we get to the final version that gets, which is bad for the humans, but it's also bad for the algorithms, because machine learning could have been able to latch onto some of that data too. And that's just one little example of this keeping the provenance track.
Mm-hmm. I think we have a big issue here for us all to address, but I want to move on because we haven't got that much time left. And there are a couple of questions near the top that, well, the top one and another one on the same subject. So The top question at the moment is specifically addressed to Mala, and it says every repository would love to have examples of how their data are used, as you presented here. How do you identify the examples and track the reuse of your data? I will also read questions a little bit down the list, but it's more or less the same. I wonder how you track the impact of your data curation, Amy. What is enabled so that you can demonstrate a return on the specialist curation? Thank you. Okay, so this is about how we impact. Obviously, the more open we are, the easier it is for users to get our data, the less likely we are to know what they have done, that they've accessed our data and what they might have done with it. So how do we balance those things? Mala first, maybe.
Sure, Juan. Thank you. I mean, it's a question that actually we internally within the institution think about quite a bit, because it's really hard to make the case with our management about the need for expanding our data curation work, and also convince staff in other units who are often thinking about which is an operational project where they're lending to countries, and a data work is part of that work, or a research paper, which again the end goal is producing the paper. They often don't think about data as a separate product, which can actually have much more impact, and sometimes more than maybe the research paper that they're creating. So it's also a constant kind of education with them. And one of the incentives we've seen is that to show them how much their data can be, when broadly disseminated, is being used, and it's creating other, is contributing to the development of other products. So I will say that we don't have any sort of clear answers to that, but I can talk to maybe a few things that we've done. I think what we're doing is citations for data sets. Encouraging people to actually cite the data set when they're using it in research papers. It's amazing how still that's not a great practice in many places. Just providing that guidance and best practice and providing different tools for people to easily cite the data set is one thing. And then the other effort that we're putting in within the curation team is to actually then source these citations and display them more visibly. If you go to the World Bank data catalog and pick some of the data sets, you will see a list of citations, basically papers and other places where that data set has been used. But again, it's an effort, and we're doing that. We're hoping at some point it's an easy enough effort to do that. But right now, it's sort of more of a manual process where we go and scour different databases to pull that information and show the impact of how much the data is being used in other places. So sorry, go on.
I was going to say a rhetorical question, which I don't want an answer to, is what percentage of the effort do you spend on tracking impact? But let's not go into that.
Exactly, right? So that's exactly what I was going to end, is like, okay, this is really the first step, right? And then comes the impact, which is really hard to measure, because you really don't have data on data at the moment. Like nobody collects, you don't even have targets on, for instance, how much institutions or governments are spending on data, or so it's kind of hard to then measure back and show impact. So yeah, I'll be actually keen to listen. Hear from others how they're doing it. But maybe one thing I would like to maybe point on the impact is what we've started doing is actually doing more, again, dissemination of what we're calling as data stories. So we're collecting these stories. Again, it's an effort that we have to put in of examples and constantly communicating that with our funders and with our end users and client countries to show the impact of data. So that is, again, something of an effort that we have to do. But yeah,
we've only got a minute left, and Amy was specifically asked this same question. So would you like to give a brief answer on that?
Yes, plus one from what Malar said. It's we encourage data citation, we capture bibliographic outputs, and it's a very manual process. On the other part of the question, the measuring impact, we do have 2 research projects that are ongoing right now at ICPSR that are looking at, and because we've standardized our curation unit and standards over the past 3 years, we're able to begin to look at different curation standards that we release data in and how much they get used. And so we have a set of forthcoming papers, the short answer being that curation, higher curation means that data get more use. And that is net of the attributes of the study. So how big the study is, how many variables it has, the things that otherwise might be selective. So we're beginning to, be able to tell the story that higher levels of curation matter at ICPSR. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, thank you. So we've gone over our time. Sorry for the chairing. And thank you all. I'm sure we would love to be able to talk for much longer on all these subjects. So thank you to the panel and thank you to the audience. Thank you for those very probing questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to answer them all. If any of the panelists want to put in written answers to those questions, they do get recorded somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where. But I think with that, I'd better draw a close because we are over our time. So thank you everyone very much indeed for the fascinating discussion, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much. See you soon. And hopefully we'll all meet at a future event as well.
Yeah.
Anything from the people behind the scenes there?
I guess not. I was wondering how many people attended.
We can find out and let you know. Yeah, clearly just so much. It just felt like a great session. It's been great reaction I've seen on Twitter as well, and you saw in the chat. Really pleased. Thanks all.
Yeah, we can forward on to all the panelists just the overall number as well, just so you have an idea.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.